exciting Babble announcement. We have 2 new team members. Liv Unrudd and Destin Metz are joining the Babble team, so we couldn't be happier. Yeah. Also, guys, as a reminder, we all tend to go to the bar Footsies after. This is welcome to everyone, and we hope to see you there. Also, we'll be celebrating Audrey's birthday, which was yesterday. Hey. So, for those of you who have not been here before, the mission of Babble is to facilitate a safe space for artists to share insights about the inner workings of their discipline, as well as their beliefs, questions, and curiosities. How do you sustain yourself psychologically, physically? What fuels your practice? What is your relationship to place, and how does environment impact your work? What values do you hold close? Each month, 2 artists will give keynote presentations with slides of their work and slides of evidence, questions, and inspiration. Artists face the temptation of an exaggerated sense of themselves as creators. How do we celebrate each other's achievements and inquiries within the constraints and pressures of the everyday? Recently, I've been thinking, it's sort of beautiful all the ways in which we miss each other, not necessarily by the magnitude or velocity created by distance or space, but talking nose to nose or cheek to cheek. A joke dissolves into the ether, a story with adjectives piled high can crumble and fall. A question answered by another question jets you deeper inside a colloquial Socratic cave. Lightness and levity permeate through questions that have been picked up and examined from a myriad of vantage points. All that is missed isn't failure per se, but perhaps just another pile. We all have fields of them. Maybe it's best to allow them to stand tall. We are bound by the gentle radiance and splendor that friendship provides. It serves as our most secure worldly cradle. According to T.J. Clark, art is an exercise in careful refusal. A short passage from Winston Churchill's book, Painting as a Pastime, states, whether you feel that your soul is pleased by the conception or contemplation of harmonies, or that your mind is stimulated by the aspect of magnificent problems, or whether you are content to find fun in trying to observe and depict the jolly things you see, the vistas of possibility are limited only by the shortness of life. Every day you may make progress, every step may be fruitful, yet there will be a stretch out before you, an ever-lengthening, ever-ascending, ever-improving path. You know you'll never get to the end of the journey, but this, so far from discouraging, only adds to the joy and glory of the climb. We ask you today, where does meaning incubate? Audrey Leshay and Max Cleary task us the job of identifying our unit of measurement regarding truth, to see beyond what is culturally accepted and to pull the curtain from ourselves and to question and celebrate our own small and large discoveries. Please welcome 2 fantastic artists and friends, Audrey Leshay and Max Cleary.
Am I first? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. My name is Max. Thank you to Hannah, Dustin, and Leave for organizing, to Scribble for hosting. I feel like no matter how often you go there, everybody needs like a 3rd place, so it's cool to know where one exists. I am an artist making work across many mediums. I'm from Hawaii, and I'm Audrey's boyfriend.
I'm Audrey, and I'm from LA. And today, instead of one of us going and then the other one going, we're kind of gonna do like a back and forth call and response, where I'll talk about one of my references or a painting, and then Max will respond with one of his works that sort of is in conversation with it, because I think over the last few months we've been realizing that our work is almost about the same thing, and it has been for years now, and we've just recently been made aware of like how much crossover there is, and I think like what we're gonna do is try and sort of show you sort of how it's all sort of connected, but also how it manifests in very different ways. And Max is gonna talk about the title of our talk.
Yeah. Sorry. So we titled the talk "Why a Snake Has No Legs and Other Just So Stories." I think Audrey and I both look to a lot of sort of scientific phenomena and just sort of unexplained, what you might call fact and what you might just call something that exists in the world. Looking at why those things exist, and we kind of pull a lot from just like folktales around that, and also just actual scientific research around it. But I think that we always approach it through the lens of the novice, and sort of choose to not ever graduate past the lens of the novice. I don't know. I think that there's like an amount of wonder that is sort of embedded in being a novice about some of these sort of vast ideas, but.
Yeah, so I'm just going to start right away. With this image that I stumbled upon in 2018 when I was in college. This is a digitally constructed image of what the average man in Jerusalem looked like around the time of Jesus. And it's basically functions as historical revision, and I think just makes us aware of how much of like our representations and human mediations on the image of Jesus define and like predict kind of how we like how he's remembered, and I think to the point where like the memory of the thing replaces the thing itself, and that's something that I'll talk about a lot. And another kind of example of that is the Shroud of Turin, which I think is just a really beautiful object. It's the piece of fabric that Jesus is believed to have been buried in, and you can see his like figure kind of printed into it. And I like this object's ability to move between its two statuses as either a religious relic or a forgery made by an artist. And I think both of them are really like kind of beautiful, but it goes even one step further when a couple years ago an artist made a 3D print of like the man in the shroud as a sculpture, and it's presented with the shroud. So it's kind of like this continuation of the visual narrative of what he looks like through like, I guess, a human mediation or something. And so what this sort of spawned a painting that I made last year. This is titled The Many Worlds Interpretation. The Many Worlds Interpretation is a theory in physics where there is a universe for every possible observation. Each of them are equally real. And I like that. I like this for the shroud, to kind of be able to be both real and unreal, but still sort of exist in our stories. And in the painting, I basically just painted the shroud, but then I added in the Rubin vase / Rubin face optical illusion of the two sort of faces looking at each other, or a vase. Basically, like, you choose what you want to see, and I like that for Jesus.
I think it's cool to say that it's the man in the shroud, right? Like, you could also just say, like, oh, this is a 3D print of Jesus, but, like, to think about it as, like, the 3D print of the man in the shroud is, like, to kind of acknowledge that it's sort of this unknown being. So my first reference, which may or may not be sort of visually obvious, it influences a lot of the work that I've made since seeing it. I was in Okinawa doing research. My family is Okinawan, and I was in the Natural History Museum, just kind of wandering around, and I stumbled upon these small artifacts. Each of the things you're seeing here is probably like at max like 2 or 3 inches in width and like 2 inches in height. So they're small, and there's a really small part of the museum dedicated to it. But I got really obsessed with them because they just looked really sort of modern and at the same time archaic. They also kind of looked like weapons, and they kind of looked like metal band logos. I grew up listening to punk and like hardcore and metal, and I was just like, oh damn, like it really looks like well, actually I don't have my arrow. Can you do it? Sorry. I was like, oh my god, it looks like the symmetry that you see and like the spikiness that you see in just like metal logos, which obviously I think in their own right, like they just as like a medium borrow from sort of like archaic and like tribal imagery. Anyway, I looked as hard as I could for information about them, but really all I could find was that they were just referred to by archaeologists as the butterfly-shaped bone objects, which that name alone just like had so much mystery embedded into it. And then, I don't read Japanese. So what I could find informationally was that people think they were either used for like spiritual ritual or just as sheer ornament. Other people suspect that they were tools. And I've talked to other people within the diaspora. No one really knows. And so this is like this example to me of like sort of like a fragment of history that I will probably never actually know the root of or the purpose of. And I think like that kind of spurred this sort of method of like reverse engineering in my work. So on the upper right, there's a red one of these things, and that's actually like a wax 3D print of what one of these objects would have been. And I think like wax and kind of the recreation of objects comes up a lot in my work. So that pretty obviously like directly influenced this work. This is like what I consider a direct rip of that. I was just trying to make my own butterfly-shaped bone object. I was thinking about them a lot. And I titled this essential item a butterfly-shaped bone object. Titles are really important to me. The title, this essential item, references sort of like all the ads that I see online, sort of telling me what like dietary supplement will make my life better, or what I don't know, like what piece I need to make my computer faster. I was just also thinking about like when I was younger, I remember thinking that adults were supposed to read magazines, and I was reading like one of my mom's like Us weeklies, and they had like an advertorial in it. And I was reading it, and I was like, yeah, I'm an adult now. I'm like getting information. And then I realized at the end of it that it was just an ad, which is why wait, where's that slide? Oh, sorry. Which is why I bring this up, right? So I couldn't find any of the like ones that I was looking at when I was a kid, but like an advertorial, right? Like something that is presented to you as information, but is actually just selling you on something, and how that kind of plays into like, or plays with our idea of what information looks like. So yeah, in the painting, the bone object is depicted as though it's sort of submerged into protective foam. I was also thinking just about museum display and how we, if you have a really nice tool, you probably have it in like a case that has die-cut foam. So yeah, thinking about it that way, thinking about it as both tool but also artifact, and thinking about the sort of like disconnect between use value and like symbolic value.
Yeah, and I think continuing on that kind of like not knowing what a material's like purpose is, or kind of like reading something or looking at something with the assumption that there is like that something happened, or something is happening there. This is a painting that I did this year. It's of a cork oak tree harvest. And I think like what it is it's just like an ode to mapping, and an ode to the material as having potential to be an archive. And I think when I think about cork, I think about cork boards. When I think about cork boards, I think about evidence maps, and kind of like mapping your ideas and trying to sort of figure out like the origin of something or where something came from. But I wanted it to just look like something happened here, but there's sort of like missing information. So underneath the cork, like it's peeled away, and I'm just sort of seeing another surface that's being used as like kind of a map. Also just like a lot of the time when I'm making a painting, I'm just thinking about like what would be fun to try and like render, because so much of the joy in painting for me comes from rendering. And I'll just be like, okay, it would sound really fun to make a painting of cork or drywall, or it would be really fun to make it look like something was sun-stained, or like there's red twine like coming out of a pinhole, and I'm kind of just trying to have fun with material. So the painting kind of becomes an ode to the material through that also. And then these are like some of the reference images that I just use. Like I just kind of pull for hours from like Google, and I just try and find like different textures that I'm like, okay, that would be fun for me to do. But that's, yeah. What?
Let me introduce the next
okay.
slide. So it's just a banger of a slide. So like I think like riffing off of Audrey's use of like the sun stain, sort of like it's drywall, but it makes me think of like a cork board and like an evidence board, something that you would see sort of like, I don't know, in some cartoon version of this, like someone who is connecting red string between pieces of evidence. And as to me, that is this image. When I'm making work, I often sort of think about myself as like playing a role or like pantomiming a character. And in the next work I'm about to show you, this is essentially who I was thinking I was in my mind the entire like year that I made the work. So this is a book I made last year called The Complex Number Zero. There are copies in the back if anybody wants to take one home. And essentially, like the short and sweet of it is that it's a photo book with a few pieces of writing that comprises a 10-year project of, it's ongoing too, but this is sort of a 10-year benchmark of me photographically documenting both my family and like geographically these places that have become sort of like origin points in my mind. I was thinking a lot about sort of like, if I were to draw a line to some geographic origin, like where would it be? I'm from Hawaii, my family is from Okinawa, my grandma grew up on the big island of Hawaii. And so throughout the book, the book is more about the act of looking rather than finding an answer. And I think something that happens in it is through images, you kind of get taken down these like estuaries of research. And some of those things go from actual like physical landmarks into things like depictions of sort of like folk tales and like ritual and sort of superstition that is held by my family. So as an example of that, on the left here is an image of this little sheet metal cat that hangs in our backyard. It has two glass marbles as eyes. My grandma, our backyard is just dry. We live in a part of Hawaii that is always dry. But my grandma's convinced that it's because cats pee on the yard. And so she hung this like steel cat that she probably got from like an advertorial, like in some junk mail. And she's convinced that the like shimmering of the eyes scares away the neighbor's cats. And I really don't know where she got that idea from, but you know, just as like an example of these kinds of like tales that are in my family. The cat plays a really big role in a lot of works that come, as we'll go through the slides, but I guess the thing that I focus on with it is that it's really interesting to me to think that like there's the possibility that in the logic of the superstition that the cat's own reflection in the marbles is what scares it away. So in some way, the image of the intruder is the thing that scares the intruder off. On the right is a more choreographed photograph that's in the book. It's my grandma digging a hole with a porcelain garden sickle until the sickle breaks, and then she buries it. And when I wanted to make the works in the book, the photos in the book, be able to show in a space, but I wanted the photographs to have a body of some sort, and I was thinking a lot about corkboards and evidence. As I was looking through all these like thousands of images, I felt like Charlie in the mailroom, like I was trying to draw a red line, and so I was thinking about like, you know, an actual like, I was playing an ethnographer of some sort, like an autoethnographer, and I was trying to connect dots between these images. And so what you're seeing here is a piece of white oak that has cork inlaid into it, and then on that cork I have a print of the photograph pinned in with sewing pins. I was thinking about like how you see butterflies pinned into glass. I was thinking about the photograph as like a specimen of some sort. And then with the use of the wood, I called these works heirlooms. I was just sort of thinking about like the sort of aspect of like dusty heirlooms in your house that are containers for history, are containers for like a narrative, are containers for like a spirit of some sort, and how that changes as they pass hands. On the right are two marbles which reference that glass-eyed cat. I was interested in kind of making a work that, at least in my logic, is looking back at you as you look at it. And then two more examples of those heirloom works.
Also, side note, that piece in the wood with the cork is titled How to Dig a Hole in Why, and the painting that I made of the cork is called How We Know Where to Dig, and that was not planned. So I feel like there's a lot about Max's book, The Complex Number Zero, that is talking about like trying to find something that doesn't exist, trying to like going on a search, and the only thing that you find is sort of more questions. And I think that kind of relates to this painting that I'm about to talk about. But I guess in a similar way, like we have no idea what dark matter is, but this is a 3D print. This is like a 3D map of the dark matter in our visible universe, released by astronomers. And like no one knows what dark matter is, but my favorite way of someone describing it is that it's proof that the universe has a skeleton too. And I think this like personifying of things that are like intrinsically not human and like much, much larger than us is as a way to kind of like put ourselves in something and like kind of memorialize like a human experience. I made this painting, which is basically an exact replica of that shape, but using like dust from my floor. I think I was thinking about trying to make something that's like super incomprehensible, like graspable and tangible. I think in a way I'm kind of trying to do my own archiving, but like with my own stuff, so that I can kind of like hold it and understand it from my perspective. So it kind of almost becomes like a diorama about the act of archiving. And that idea of dioramas sort of pops up in a lot more of my work, but these are like detail shots of the painting. It's just sort of like dust bunnies. These are like reference photos that I use. So like the ones on the right are also maps of like dark matter, and they sort of look very like skeletal. And I think they're kind of like mimicked in the way that like dust bunnies like gather and make sort of forms themselves. And these are images that I look at in terms of like I think there's a lot that I'm trying to do that just to make it understandable for me. So when I make associations with material, like I'm like, what is a map to me? And right away in my head, I'm like treasure map, like pirate map. That's like my first visual association. And I'm just kind of looking at graphs and stuff as like visual, just purely like visually, like I'm not aware of like what's happening in the upper like left map. But I think it's like for sure related, but there's just like visual correlations that I'm trying to make between human like activity and things that like we want to understand but are sort of like impossible. I can go to the next one.
I think the mention of material is pretty interesting. And I guess like similarly how you were talking about like when you think of a map, you think of a pirate map, and you know when you think of like something that is describing scientifically unseen or unknowable aspects of our world, you think of like graphs or like a 3D render of the thing. Similarly, but not the same. You know, I was talking about heirlooms earlier, and now we're kind of moving to like mapping. This is just an image from a show that I did at my buddy Aaron's space, who's here somewhere. Aaron was actually the one of the first artists who spoke at Babble, and aside from being a patron of the arts, is an amazing painter. But I did this show around the book. And so on the wall, you can see a few of those heirloom pieces. They're all really small. I had to ship them to Hawaii at one point, so they were all built to fit inside of USPS flat rate boxes. And what we're going to be talking about is actually this table that's on the bottom right. My phone turned off, sorry. Okay, so, you know, thinking back on Audrey's painting of the map and sort of bringing this kind of like vast, unknowable type of map or infographic into a more understandable sort of like human space. I was still thinking about heirlooms, and I bring up the material point to say that, you know, like when I think of something that's an heirloom or something that's been passed down, I definitely don't think of like powder-coated steel modernist furniture. I think of something like old and pretty warm in tone, probably that's got some like sign of like grime on it. And I think that's where a lot of the use of wood comes from, in my work, but I made this game table in thinking of mapping. The title of the work is Game Table, Real Map of Imaginary Place. When I was doing research for the book, I was reading about how cartographers used to draw a map of a previously unmapped place. And this one line in a book really stuck out to me, which was map makers often imagine an immense slab. And to me, that immense slab, I'm actually going to skip ahead a few. To me, that immense slab in my mind, on the left here is like a image of a blank SketchUp model. It made me think of like a 3D modeling space where there's no grid, right? So like within 3D modeling, there's often a grid placed, or at least some kind of axes placed within this giant gray vast slab. And any form of sort of like information, whether it's a grid or the axes or like a little icon of a human, gives you this sense of scale. But without any of that, you know, within the immense slab, you're sort of at the same time like infinitesimally small and also capable of being gigantic. And so I'm gonna go back. Coincidentally, I had also just found this aluminum chandelier on the street in Beverly Hills, and I'd had it with me for like 4 years, never knowing what to do with it. But I picked it up off the street because I just thought that it looked like a skeleton. Like it was so covered in landlord paint. It was just like caked in white. And it really looked like bones to me. And then when I picked it up, I was like, oh, it's actually like a really sort of shitty rendition of bamboo. And so there was something about this like kind of serendipitous crossover between the domestic space, but also this like mass-produced like rendition of nature that you would probably associate with the tropics. And so I made a table out of it. The marbles, like from the glass-eyed cat, play a role in this again. I had seen on the left, I saw this work, this Giacometti piece, which I think is called Trick of the Eye or Play of the Eye. And on the right, I don't even know what that one's called, but it's Giacometti. And these two pieces are, like, to me, they look like game boards. Like, they look like something that's supposed to be played, but they just lack any sort of rule, right? And they really kind of lack any sort of piece to play with. But I was just interested in the idea of like the game board as a topography and sort of the decision making, or sort of the lack of being able to make a decision about what the first move is, as being the game itself. So my game table has no rules. There are routed into the top surface little divots for the marbles to go. So there is like the illusion that you could play it, and actually at the show people did play it. I think they were playing it kind of like mini golf, like try to get the marble in the hole, which to me honestly felt great because it kind of reminded me of like spinning a globe and shoving your finger down onto it, and wherever it stops, that's where you go. But yeah, so the game table is sort of this reference to like the idea of the slab, the idea of mapping, but also the idea that there is sort of no scale to this map yet.
Obviously sort of continuing with maps and also kind of like an infinite slab. I think this is really similar. This is the like cosmic microwave background radiation map. It's basically like the earliest light map that we have of the universe. It's all of the leftover heat from the Big Bang. I think like the earliest that we have in here is like 300,000 years after the Big Bang, which is quite young. So I am kind of like thinking about this as a baby picture. And then that sort of made this painting, which is just slapping it kind of directly onto a fossil. Because I think a lot of the work that I make is made with an awareness of an ending, like an ending that is coming. And I think I like to think about like beginnings and endings, especially when I make work that references cosmology, because it's sort of all about kind of finding origins. But I think I wanted to imagine what fossils of our images would look like, or fossils of things that we make now. Kind of in looking at a baby picture, I'm trying to imagine it much, much later. And I think like what this painting encapsulates is like the feeling of taking a baby picture and also like finding it years later at a flea market, and kind of that like nothing in between kind of dissociation from like events or something, but definitely just an awareness of an ending. And I think like the way it's painted, I'm referencing a little bit like Western religious painting, because a lot of the time they'll make an image about a narrative, and the way that they paint it is so literal that it's almost funny. It's like this really strange like collage of things. And I think just sort of like slapping this map onto a rock is almost like a punchline in the painting. And yeah, and I think like Fossils of Our Time really plays with Max's next work, which we'll talk about.
Don't you see the connection between this and the painting? Okay, yeah, so this is a vacuum form. It's how you make like bubble packaging for products. Essentially, you put a sheet of plastic in it, an oven heats the plastic up, and then you shove a form through it and suck it down with the vacuum, and that's how you get these objects. I have access to one, and I have to use one at one of the places I work. And part of vacuum forming is that you're just sitting there waiting for plastic to heat up. And certain plastics take a really long time to heat up. One night I was helping a student and was just zoned out waiting for this plastic to heat. And I noticed on the vacuum form that we have, which is quite old, this little plastic burn on the front of the steel cage around it. And in my mind, I was just like, wow, that looks like a cave painting. And I started thinking like, okay, in the future, when this steel cage is unearthed, what would a future archaeologist think that this burn meant? Again, I'm kind of thinking about this like separation of like actual value, use value, and then like symbolic value, both in the time that the thing exists and is functioning, and at the time that it's found again. So kind of thinking about an end in some way, like you're talking about. But in my mind, that burn really looked like a long horse. And so I made this, also speaking about painting literally, I, as best as I could, made a direct copy of that burn. So on the left is a painting called Long Horse. Yeah, I was just thinking about like when this little plastic burn is found hundreds of years into the future, and any trace of nature and animals as we currently know them doesn't exist anymore, will someone say like, wow, they had long horses in the past, and like we need to study Long Horse. And on the right is a companion piece called Long Horse Later. In my mind, this is sort of a little after Long Horse is discovered and studied, and museums really want to have sort of a physical depiction of Long Horse. And I think that like you said something earlier about how we like when we have pieces of like big information that we can't wrap our minds around, we need to put it into something that we as humans can have some kind of connection with for us to understand it. And so in my mind, in the future, when this fabricated skeleton of Long Horse is on display, there's going to be a skeleton of a human riding Long Horse to A, put it into scale, but also B, to say like, perhaps this is how Long Horse was utilized. And I think that there's something in there about how like within an anthropocentric point of view, nature and animals and things that are not human are always sort of subject to human use and sort of like to their connection to humans when they just don't need to be.
Yeah, I think the idea of finding something and like assuming that it represents the entirety or like a huge part of like what we were or whatever, like what it was like on Earth. That sort of experience of like when the world has ended and someone finds this Long Horse fossil, like kind of coming to conclusions about it that are totally like disjointed from reality. I think that's also happening in this sculpture that I made this year called Public Sculpture, The Whole World. And I'm thinking about like fossils of universal experiences, I think. And the memory of making like a shoebox diorama in school, I think that that's like something that maybe a lot of people remember. And how interesting it is that like we make dioramas in the first place, because it's like we're recreating this thing, and whoever's looking at it and hasn't been there has to take it as truth. And I think I'm imagining a very similar scenario to someone finding Longhorse, and like the apocalypse has happened, everything is burned down, and all that's left is this like shoebox diorama. And this is like, I guess, a cave painting also in a way, where it's like it's all we have of a certain era. And I think I'm thinking about what conclusions people would come to when looking at this. Like, if people would assume that all trees were flat and that like we were all deer and like all water came from rivers and like the sun only ever existed in the corner of our like vision. And I think, yeah, I'm interested in this like unintentional disruption that's happening like from reality. And I think that's also apparent in the material of this work. So it's not bronze, but it looks like bronze. But it's made of aluminum, it's cast aluminum, and I painted it to look like bronze with this paint that is made of actual metal particles, so you can actually patina it. So I sprayed the sculpture with liver of sulfur, and it blackened it, and it aged it, so it kind of contributes to that narrative of like this like falsifying of information, whether intentional or not. It's kind of like places it into like a timeline or like a level of significance that it didn't really carry when it was made. Yeah.
Okay, so my take on like the sort of universal or like ubiquitous experience, as it's also tied to like an object sort of holding a symbolic value that is maybe greater than its parts. In my family, we've always broken wishbones, kind of whenever one is available, like not just, I don't know, I guess it's Thanksgiving, I think is when people do it, but yeah, it's just a thing that my mom and my grandma and I would do. And for a while now, I think for like 10 years, there's a wishbone in the house that has remained unbroken. And I always think about it as like, until that wishbone is broken, it contains luck, and neither of us have it. Only when it's broken does the luck get transferred. I guess like statistically, an even split is possible. So, and that makes me think like, if you do actually evenly split a wishbone, like the mass of each side is identical, does that mean that both parties get 50% luck? And then also, if you each have 50% luck, does anybody have any luck at all? Because what is 50% luck? So I made this piece sort of as a portrait. I hate to get kind of wood guy with it, but in my mind, it is a little wood guy. The grain on the two pieces of birch that make the panel in the back, I always kind of saw as two people trying to break the wishbone, or at least holding the wishbone. Maybe they're actually holding it, keeping it from being broken. The wishbone in this piece is made out of jeweler's wax. I got hobbies really take over my life, and I got really into jewelry making, so I had a lot of wax around. But I've actually come to really love jeweler's wax as just a medium in its own right. But I also think there's something about this idea that we keep hovering around, which is the representation of the thing replacing the thing itself. So what you're looking at is a wax wishbone that's pinned into this board. I guess in some ways I also think of this piece as like a break glass in case of emergency type of joke. Yeah, and then, okay, this is just an aside. This thought didn't go into the making of this work, but as I've looked at it, we live with it, it's on our wall. I have sort of thought to myself, like, the wishbone is the furcula, which is the bone that connects a bird's head and neck to its body. And I think everybody has heard that if you like sever a chicken's head, the body can still continue functioning. And somewhere in there, I think I started to, I don't know, like ruminate about like, well, is that what like luck is? It's like something that exists between the sort of automatic motor experience of the body and the capability for the brain to start creating a narrative and creating belief, and how that then sort of channels through an entire being.
Yeah, this is another like universal experience, especially as it relates to like kind of youth and like early years. And I think it also follows the thread of like projecting ourselves onto cosmology. This painting is titled Redshift. Redshift in astronomy is the filter or the lens that you use to see the things that are the oldest and the farthest away from us. Like the James Webb Telescope uses redshift to see everything that's like really far away. And I think this like experience, growing up, many people that I knew, including myself, like the first thing that we learned how to draw was an eye, and it just sort of became this repetitive like practice that appeared on all of our like worksheets and homework and everything. Like everyone wanted to like master one eye, and it was never two eyes, it was like just the one. And then also the experience of writing your name kind of over and over again, trying to find your signature, trying to find your handwriting, kind of trying to like put that experience into something that is like ancient. And I also just really love the like aesthetic of lined paper. I think it's really beautiful as like kind of like a stand-in for like where the thing was made. Like it kind of tells you where it was made. And sort of following that narrative around like materials and like universal experiences. I mean, these are just some references that I use for the next painting, but this is petrified wood. So I started to think about wood and its potential to like, it's kind of always exists as an archive in whatever form or state that it is in. So there's always like rings on a tree which function as an archive. As soon as it's petrified or fossilized, calcified, it becomes this archive of like nature from a really long time ago. And when it becomes paper also, paper is an archive itself. When it becomes a box, it's an archive. And thinking about just sort of wood and making like an ode to it, similar to the way that like the cork painting functions, where it's kind of like a memorial to like a material that is used to like catalog or remember things. So this is a painting titled Forever Material. It's basically just petrified wood with almost like this print or like fossil of lined paper in it. And these are just detail shots. But this was made like a year after the Redshift painting, so there's like a bit of like a time change, but it kind of shows, I think, that I'm thinking about really similar ways of talking about time through a material. Yeah.
Beautiful segue. Yeah, I mean, okay, well, one thing that stood out to me is like the thought of like as soon as it becomes petrified, right? Which is like, I mean, like I think about it that way too, right? Where it's like as soon as something becomes petrified, it's actually like calcium, but like that process actually takes thousands of years and like, I don't know, like tens of tons of pressure. And so, yeah, there's something about like long time in that work. And I think similarly in this work, I'm making a portrait without a person. There's always yardsticks floating around the house I grew up in. My mom and grandma both do seam work. And so, yeah, I've just always seen yardsticks around the house. And I don't know, I just wanted to make this, I guess, kind of an ode to time and aging, but also to measurement as a concept in itself, how we know what age is and like how we know how long we've been here, how we know how much time we have left. So this cane is built to the same height as the one my grandma uses, and then stamped into it are 36 inches, so yardstick. This is kind of the first time I start using like actual units of measurement in a piece of work, but it's something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And also just I think kind of about like this yardstick being a form of like an unreliable narrator, where like technically you could use it to measure 36 inches if you needed to, but you know, because of that bend, it starts to become this kind of iffy source.
Yeah, I think the idea of the unreliable narrator is something that I think we both play because, like, I think in my paintings, I'm trying to convince you that these objects actually exist or that these, like, situations actually exist. When thinking about, like, units of measurement and, like, universal experiences, this piece is about kind of math. And the title of it is Linkos, which is an attempt at making a universal language only using math, because it's kind of assumed that if there ever was a universal language, it would only be through mathematics. I think, like, this work is also just about, like, enlightenment as a young person and, like, early discoveries in your life. And I kind of just, like, the way that we're all introduced to math is through the order of operations, I think. PEMDAS, and a lot, if you grew up, like, in the US, maybe a lot of you learned, like, a mnemonic to remember PEMDAS, which is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, so it's parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. And I think, like, this kind of funny way at remembering something, like trying to make that universal almost by imagining that a meteor, which is what this is, like, crashed onto Earth and already sort of stamped into it is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, because I want it to be true and I want, like, aliens to learn math in the same way that we do. And yeah, I think I was just, yeah, that's sort of what that work is about. But
Okay, we're talking about interspecies communication. This is a video I found on YouTube of a beehive shimmering. And as far as I've read, the reason that this hive does it, it's a specific species of bees, I forget which kind. When they sense a predator is nearby, the bees sort of, with their hive mind, all wag their butts in a specific order that creates this, like, psychedelic wave pattern. But ultimately, it's like sort of this beautiful pattern making, but what it means is that this community of bees feels that there's a threat nearby. There was a point in time where, and I still do it now and then, but there was a point in time where I was really into making paintings from YouTube. I was kind of just thinking about it as a way to bring like stills from sort of vernacular videos into a space to be thought about sort of more poetically. So I made this work at an art space that used to be in Santa Barbara. Some friends of mine ran it out of their garage. It was called Riviera Parking. And all the shows took place in a garage. And so for my show there, I built this stretcher, which was 16 feet wide, 7 feet tall. So essentially it blocks you off from going into the garage at all. And on that canvas, I painted that video. You know, in my mind, I think there's something interesting about, through that video, I was witnessing a natural phenomena that I probably would not have and will not experience in my lifetime. So there's like something sort of, there's something really special about it. There's like almost something spiritual about it. But if you think about why the beehive was even shimmering to be videotaped in the first place, it's because it felt there was a threat. And in my mind, the threat was the videographer. And so I think, you know, we're kind of, I think when Audrey's last piece, it is this like evidence of another species learning math in the same way, but the actual writing is saying, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And there's something about a direct address in there where like that meteor and then the painting of that meteor is sort of speaking from the first person. And I am really interested in sort of writing that speaks in the second person, so using the word you, where it's speaking directly to the reader. So in my painting, instead of shimmering a pattern, the beehive is shimmering the word you. Yeah, and again, kind of hearkening back to the glass-eyed cat, I'm trying to create works that in some way look back at you, and they're sort of asking you like what your position is within this. It's like, you know, in like the thriller horror movie, you never think that you're the killer. But I think that's kind of what these works ask. And then around the canvas are all these glass jars, half full of water. This also links back to the book in some way. So these are images from my book. Similar to the marble-eyed cat, another sort of like folktale my grandma has like followed my whole life is this idea that someone gave to her, I think she said in like the 50s, which is if you want to keep cats out of the yard, you put a glass jar half full of water. And the shimmering or the reflection of the cat in the water scares the cat away. So again, it's this idea of like the image of the intruder themselves is what scares the intruder away. So, and these jars are just all over the yard that I grew up around. Why isn't this going? Can you switch it? Okay, so anyway, around the canvas are all these jars half full of water. I mean, most of them are with water. Some of them have, you can see this one in the middle right here. There's like a little bit of like an illusion going on. Gel wax, you know those like squishy candles that you can get? You just melt it into a jar and it looks like water suspended. My arrow's not working, sorry.
Following that, in terms of like animals and their processes, kind of like reflecting, like making us see ourselves and this like second person thing, and making us see ourselves especially as a threat. And I think when I made these paintings, I was thinking a lot about the fact that we've been in a really long breakup with our planet, like for like so long, and we're the bad guy. And I think thinking about like endings and meaning, that is sort of where these works came from. But these paintings are titled Thanatosis 1 and Thanatosis 2. It's a possum and a hog-nosed snake. They're both animals that practice thanatosis, which is the process of feigning your own death until a predator has left and until you are safe. And I really just think that these works are made from like wishful thinking, that as soon as we're gone, like the earth will just come back to life and be fine, and it will have won. And I think in the possum, in the possum fur, there's like the print of the Earth's continents, and then like the snake is sort of coiled around the globe. So it's kind of a direct metaphor, I guess. But then I think it was maybe like a year later, I was thinking about similar things, obviously, like endings. And this is a still from a like Netflix documentary about infinity. And there's a little bit in there which kind of like went viral for a second, but basically the idea is if you were to put an apple in a box, and it's a box where like nothing can come in and nothing can go out, the apple would rot, it would turn to dust, and then it would turn to energy particles. And the energy particles would start cycling through all of their possible states that they could exist in, which is a huge number, but it's not infinite. So eventually the particles will start having to reuse states they've been in before, and the idea is that you could come back to this box and open it, and an apple would be in there again. And I think following, the hope for regeneration when thinking about our planet, I just really sort of enjoyed making that kind of relationship between the apple and the earth. And I just wanted to paint an apple in a box. And I was like, I just want it to be in like this, again, kind of like this idea of bringing things back to like our level of understanding through our materials. I'm like thinking about like a USPS box and just kind of, I don't know. And then these are just sort of details of the painting. Another sort of painting where I was like, oh, it would be really fun to figure out how to like render cardboard. And this is like what my camera roll looked like when I was trying to figure out like how to make that painting. And that's like what my whole camera roll looks like when I'm making any painting. There's just like sort of a couple weeks of just like things like this, or just screenshots of things that I find online as references. And Max, in the beginning, talked about us sort of like kind of remaining novices on things. And a lot of the research that I do is on Reddit, especially when it comes to like physics theories that I really don't understand. And I think I just really love this comment that someone left about the documentary, like, and this sort of specific bit on it, where it's like, doesn't this apply that we can't die forever because eventually we will be back? And I think like it's just really It's just really funny, and I think it kind of says everything that the painting says, maybe better, but yeah.
Yeah, Reddit subreddit explain it like I'm 5 is really what fuels both of our artist practice.
Yeah, physics for kids.
Yeah, simple English Wikipedia. So I kind of forgot to say this earlier, but I think it holds true with these last 2 works. I think an interesting crossover between Audrey and my practice is that like she's often approaching ideas that are sort of so vast that it encapsulates like the entire universe or the entire world in some way. Where and the way that gets depicted, I think in some instances can feel similar to how my work gets depicted, but I'm often sort of approaching it from these like much more like micro origin points where it's a little bit more about like truly inside of a domestic space or truly inside of sort of like the terrestrial world. And so just, riffing off the box, this is a work that I made recently. It was for a show that was centered around a gobi, and as far as it was explained to me, and I think this is a pretty good explanation, a gobi is a piece of traditional Korean furniture often found in like an office, like a home office, where you would store things like letters that had just been received, letters that were about to go out, other documents that were sort of important to like you living your life. And so I was thinking about a piece or like an object that was like a container for an identity. And my mom has always had banker's boxes around the house, folded up, that get folded out when we need to use them. I've used them in moving. I also just personally travel with the banker's box instead of rolling luggage on a plane. And I have 2 of them folded up in the garage right now. But yeah, in my mind, I think that like I've just had so many aspects of who I am in objects inside of a banker's box that to me it became this idea of like a container for an identity. I also was thinking about, in media, when you see a banker's box, it's usually because someone's getting fired and they're taking all of their things that they had in their office out. And I think, like everybody has to work a job, and there's something really tragic to me about the idea that like your entire being within the space of like a corporate office could fit into this box, and sort of like as that box leaves, so does the trace of you in that place. I don't know. I think about like haunted house movies or haunted house stories where there's ghosts and things that happen in the house, but the house is the main character. And in some way, I think like the office is sort of the main character within the banker's box, or like the idea of like the job being tied to identity. So the way that I depicted the banker's box, it's a piece of foam that I carved and covered in resin and paint. I wanted it to look like it was petrified. So like this idea of a future fossil of the present, where many years later, someone unearths this now calcified, completely solid, like calcium banker's box, where technically there is someone's identity sealed inside of it, but actually any aspect of that identity, those documents, those objects, is completely gone. It's now just completely stone. I was also just thinking about hide keys, so I stuck a key in there. Oh, it's me again. Okay. I'm just bringing these back up to say that like that's all the work that I'm going to show that has already been made. I'm just going to briefly talk about what is being worked on right now. In the book, caves play a really big role. They're a repeating character. They're kind of a repeating location. I visited a bunch of caves when I was doing the photographing for the work. I was also thinking about sort of caves as this like symbolic of just exploration. It's like subterranean. It's a place where it's just dark. Like you need artificial light to see anything. And I was thinking about underground as a place where we either bury things to be hidden or we unearth things that were previously hidden. And I was, it's just thinking about like, do those things want to be hidden, or like, do they want to be unearthed? So these are 2 more images from the book. So there's this aspect of like the man-made in the cave, and there's sort of like nods to like measurement within these places that kind of defy measurement. I recently also have just been fed algorithmically a lot of videos of spelunkers, which is essentially like the sport of shoving yourself into the tiniest holes in the ground that you possibly can and exploring. It's super like anxiety inducing, but again, I was just kind of thinking about like the act of searching and the act of exploring through the lens of cave exploration. So the project I'm working on right now is I'm sort of slowly writing a book about cave exploration, again, through the lens of the novice, and I'm borrowing a lot of text from other books, and I'm kind of using this sort of collage writing to essentially create one long poem, which is about cave exploration. If anybody's interested in architecture, this book on the left is key. It's really interesting, and it's about it's just a really poetic view of architecture. But anyway, examples of books that I'm like pulling text from. And so then that comes back to these images. So these are 2 images from my mom and my grandma's house. They have a rat problem, and my mom and grandma got 2 cats to fix the rat problem. Both of the cats can't catch a rat. One of the cats is cross-eyed and epileptic. It's so now, but they're like sweet cats, and like now they have these two family members that live with them. But my mom has become so obsessed with keeping the cats occupied and entertained, and so she's been making these cardboard cat tunnels all over the house. And it's a really tiny house, but there are these tunnels everywhere. And I was thinking about caves, and I saw these, and I was like, oh, these are actually sort of like these kind of subterranean caves inside of the domestic space. And so I just started photographing inside of them. So these are just shots from inside my mom's cat tunnels. And so I think that these will start to be illustrations that coincide with this writing that I'm collaging together. Just some more reference images. This is a stereograph, which, stereographs are a pretty interesting piece of photo history where partially it is kind of like survey photography, meant that it's documenting a landscape. It's sort of meant for informational purposes, but it's a stereograph. And at the time, stereographs were, it's this form of entertainment. It's kind of the novelty of an Oculus at this point, right? Like a VR headset. And then I started making my own cardboard caves and photographing inside of them. So just some like recent images. Also just thinking about like when archaeologists would explore and dig, the photographs that would come back with them or be published around like objects or flora or fossils that were found. Just reference images here. And I'm kind of also making sort of like the crossover between spirit photography and those more scientific documentary images. And then lastly, sort of crossover, I'm thinking about unreliable narrators a lot again. So I think like in writing that book, I am becoming the literal unreliable narrator. I'm writing a book essentially about like how to properly explore caves, fully from the novice point of view, fully collaging other people's writing to make this one long poem. This is not an actual image of it, but this is to illustrate the idea of Mel's Hole, which is a supposed hole that exists in Ellensburg, Washington, it started to be talked about in the 70s. Some guy named Mel Waters called into a radio station saying, hey, there's an infinite hole on my property. Like neighbors were using it as a dump site. He claimed that he tied fishing line together and dropped a weight 80,000 feet down, and it still didn't hit the bottom. And I think, we've talked a lot about sort of searching for something that's unfindable, and I'm thinking about caves, and so I think like Mel's Hole really stuck out in my mind as this idea of like this thing that exists that is ultimately terrestrial, but sort of only begs more questions. And also like that idea of like the 80,000 foot weight drop, there's an aspect of measurement to that, right? There's like, in order to think about the infinite hole, someone had to say, yeah, well, it's more than 80,000 feet. On the left is an image of the Betz Mystery Sphere. This was a steel sphere that was found by some family in Florida in the 70s. No one knew what it was. It just showed up on their property, and they claimed that it had alien properties. And for the longest time, people were investigating it. People were thinking like, oh, this is actual alien material, alien technology. It turned out that it was actually just like a missing ball from a ball valve gauge, big gauge. And that, like, as an object to me is so interesting because it is this like physical manifestation of something that's got a very great divide in its use value, symbolic value, and like what our belief in the thing is, or in what sort of like the building of belief around it is. On the right is an old image of Le Grand Quai, which is not the original, but it is the physical manifestation of a true kilogram, meaning that like the kilogram that is used to measure mass technically has its standard in this cylinder that's inside of those bell jars. The thing with the Grand Quai is there's 40 copies, I think, or something like that, all over the world, which are constantly being studied. But the thing with the metal that makes the Grand Quai and all of its copies is that it's still subject to slight mass gain and loss. So just because particles in the air, atoms, molecules in the air collect on it, the original kilogram is actually gaining and losing mass constantly. So yeah, I'm thinking about units of measurement and the objects that sort of define them as unreliable narrators. And these are just some examples of other like really niche measuring tools that I found that felt really religious to me. And I guess in just thinking about like belief and sort of searching and exploring and measuring what we base all of those findings on, or what we base how we find those things, what we base that in. So now I'm kind of like messing around with making the actual tools of exploration. So this is a set of rulers that, again, you could use it to measure something, but I don't really know how you would do it. On the right is a ruler that starts at 1 quintillion. In the middle is a piece of that previous image. It's a ruler that slides in and out. And then on the left is a completely bent ruler. So yeah, working through that material. That's where I'm at.
I like that you started your talk with all of your like family history about trying to keep cats away, and then it ends with your family like making a home for cats in their house. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to talk about what I'm working on now, kind of just using a lot of reference material. So what I'm trying to make work about now is the psychology around what we choose to remember and memorialize and represent, and the psychology around intentional and unintentional misrepresentations of things that happened. And I think we're constantly trying to like correct and adjust findings that we've had, like kind of like the digitally constructed image of Jesus. But it just a bunch of reminders that our memory is not tied to reality. And I think I'm thinking about two stories as like a catalyst for the work I'm making now. So this is the Piltdown Man. In the 1910s, I think, an archaeologist was tipped off about like skull fragments or like bones in a gravel pit in like a residential area of England called Piltdown. And he went, and of course he found fragments of bone, and they were essentially the missing link between us and apes. It was like, it proved that we are ancestrally tied to apes. It proved the existence of early humans. And it did a lot for Darwin's theory of evolution. It like really played a role in like solidifying that. Then in the 50s, this scientist at the Natural History Museum was like rooting around and found the like skull fragments, and was like, the teeth are attached to this using like dentist's adhesive, and like there's like gravel like shoved into the teeth, and it's painted with oil paint, and like the teeth have been filed down, and it turns out that the entire story was a hoax. And I think like this kind of moment of like realizing that this huge part of history is like not real, is like kind of what I'm interested in, is like these moments where we kind of realize that we kind of have to like kind of revisit a lot of stories that have been told. And I think that's kind of what I try and do in my paintings also, is just kind of revisiting stories and like kind of representing them through like images. But so that's one story that I'm thinking about. And then the next one is the excavation site at Pompeii. So if you don't know what happened at Pompeii, like a long time ago, a volcano erupted, and It covered all of the people in Pompeii with layers of ash and pumice, and ash and pumice have a very similar chemical composition to cement. So all these people were basically just like covered with cement. And what happens is their bodies like decompose under this cement, and all that's left is their bones. And people discovered that if you're walking around and you kind of like tap on the ground like a drum, you can hear the places where people were buried. They started pouring plaster into these cavities in the ground, and what they were left with was pretty accurate depictions of the positions that people were in when they died. And this is all basically information that I learned from a lecture that was held at the Getty last year. This is like nothing that I've discovered at all. But there were many like people cast, and then there were also like animals, because anything organic that was buried was able to be cast. So there was like a dog, that was the 8th victim, there was a pig and a donkey, and like these are a set of wooden doors that they were able to cast. I am focusing on recent history where the woman that runs this project, she got approval from the government to put all of the casts through CAT scanners and to x-ray them. Because she knew that the bones were inside of them, but she wanted to see who was inside, because using like these CAT scans, they can determine a lot about the people that died. And it was interesting because it disproved a lot of theories over time. For a long time, people were like, oh, most of the people that died were women and children because they don't run as fast. And anyone with a distended belly is like a pregnant woman. But that was not true. They're kind of like learning all of this through scanning them. And what they're also, well, this is also like what the scans look like when they put the casts into the CAT scanners. What I am interested in is kind of how you can see the casts change. This one was made in like the late 1800s, and it's very like Rodin-esque. It's like really beautiful. And then the one on the right is made in the 60s, and it looks like modern sculpture. Like it's really quite strange. The people who poured these casts were artists. They were like, they worked in restoration in sculpture. You can see kind of these like subtle manipulations, or not so subtle manipulations over time, as to like how they represent the victims that they cast. And as they put the bodies into the CAT scanners, they also found like metal rods holding them together, showing that like it had to be cast multiple times, and they like kind of reattached limbs. The dog was like cast and attached in like 7 places, like it was in pieces. They put the pig through the CAT scanner, and it had no bones in its head, so the head was entirely constructed, like it wasn't the head. And I think these like human interventions on archiving and like cataloging our time, that's like what I'm really interested in, is like the moments where like it switches from that to that. And what the people were kind of like thinking about when they did that. And the message that they're kind of trying to communicate through doing stuff like that. So those are 2 stories that I'm really thinking about. Also, like with the Piltdown Man, a huge part of that was Britain at the time was trying to prove its like significance in the evolution of humankind. The Piltdown Man was like an answer to their prayers. Like Britain could claim that it was the birthplace of mankind, and the first man was an Englishman. And so there's like all of this like colonialism like built into discovery and built into the way that we tell stories. And so my most recent painting is this one. This is basically just a painting of the story of the Piltdown Man, kind of just like about it. And these are some detail shots. And this will be up at Robert's Projects next week in a group show. If you guys are around, you should totally come out and look at it. And I think that's it. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please. I think we're doing questions, right, Hannah? 5 minutes? 5 minutes of questions. It's totally fine if no one has any. We'll be at Footsie's if you guys want to go there and ask us questions. That's fine too. Yes. No, it's actually not. It's a dowsing stick. So like people used to use it to like find water. They would like hold it and like search for water using it. So kind of like the theme of the show that this is in is alchemy, and I think like thinking about all of these ways that we've kind of tried to do science over time. I think like the dowsing stick is a really funny one. Yeah. But it looks like a wishbone, totally. Cool. Sweet. Nice. We did it. We're done. Thank you for coming.